Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on Unit 8 in the build-up to the Civil War. This is Part 3. This is Part 3 of four PowerPoints. Part 1 was not a video. Part 2 we already talked about, and this is Part 3, so we're going to discuss key causes of the Civil War. Part 4, we'll talk about the changes in political parties. So, key causes. There's one thing I really want to emphasize. I can't possibly overemphasize it. There was not one cause of the Civil War. To argue that there was only one cause oversimplifies a very complex process, and these several causes that we're going to discuss developed over time, and they arose based on the context of the time. So if you really want to understand the Civil War, and you do, you need to understand that this was a complex process. There was not one thing that caused it. To say it was only slavery or only sectionalism is historically dishonest at best, and absolutely factually inaccurate at worst. All right, so we're going to talk about all the major big picture key causes. All right, this is a nice flowchart or concept map that I made. At least I think it's nice. The concept map I made of the key causes of the Civil War. You can see the big picture ones have their own or directly off of the key causes of the Civil War, and then there are like subtopics. Like the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act factors into that, as does the Underground Railroad. And if we shift over to the KansasNebraska Act, you have the Lecompton Constitution, popular sovereignty, and bleeding Kansas. So we're going to talk about all of these ideas over the course of this PowerPoint, except for the Dred Scott decision and John Brown's raid, because I discussed those in the first video lesson about this topic. All right, so the key ideas we're going to talk about here, we're going to talk about the Wilmot Proviso, the key elections in 1848 and 1860, the Compromise of 1850. We're going to talk a little bit about political parties, but we're just going to scratch the surface because I have a whole video lesson that's going to be devoted to that. We're going to talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and everything that goes with it, and violence in the Senate. So the Wilmot Proviso, this happened in 1846. This was right around Mexican-American War time frame. So the idea behind this was to ban all blacks, both free and slave, from the territory that it would involve Mexican secession in order to preserve land for white farmers. So inherently racist. The idea was it attempted to limit the perceived pro-Southern Polk presidency. So this was the force behind David Wilmot's suggestion. This did not pass Congress, but the debate did reveal sectional, not party, divisions. So now you see the party isn't the issue. This togetherness that we had when we had two big national parties that we talked about in the previous lesson, now it's not party. Party is disintegrating, and the sectional tensions are coming to the fore. So there's a major shift in politics that now you have the development of additional parties, and they are sectional political parties. So the election of 1848. Slavery was the key issue. Slavery in the West was the key issue in this election. You have this gentleman, a Democrat, Lewis Cass. He proposed this idea of popular sovereignty. This is very, very important, popular sovereignty. This would allow territorial settlers, not Congress, to decide if slavery would exist in those territories. So the residents of that territory would put together a constitution and vote and decide whether or not they would be slave or free. So that was one candidate. Then you have the Whig candidate of Zachary Taylor. He completely evaded the slavery issue, didn't even want to discuss it. And then the introduction of this new party called the Free Soil Party. And this party was created by Northern abolitionists, and they nominated Martin Van Buren, who we remember from the Age of Jackson. So slavery in the West was a key issue. Free Soilers did not equal abolitionists. There's an important distinction here. Just because they wanted to stop the expansion of slavery didn't mean that they wanted equality for blacks and that they wanted full emancipation. They just wanted to stop the spread, not necessarily stop slavery. Southern Whigs liked Taylor because he owned slaves. Northern Whigs liked Taylor because he promised to let Congress decide about slavery. Now, Southern Democrats liked the popular sovereignty because the state conventions could decide, and Northern Democrats liked popular sovereignty because it let the settlers decide. So this is a breakdown between the Free Soilers, the Whigs, and the Democrats, just so you can see how split the parties themselves were. Not only do we have three semi-major parties, but we also have splits within those parties. So I want you to take note of that fact as we go forward. So, Compromise of 1850. This was an epic fail. Henry Clay, bless his heart, he was amazing, but, you know, not everything the man touched turned to gold, and the Compromise of 1850 was an epic fail. So, California was admitted as a free state. The rest of the new lands acquired from Mexico would be decided by popular sovereignty, whether or not they would be slave or free. We did abolish the slave trade, but not slavery. and only in D.C. Okay, so it didn't abolish the slave trade everywhere, just Washington, D.C. Then there was a new fugitive slave law that now put federal marshals involved in catching slaves. So it's a state and a federal thing that's going to happen. Southerners were not happy when Taylor proposed admitting New Mexico and California as states. They were like, listen, popular sovereignty, California is going to go free, and New Mexico has no slaves, right? And it doesn't have a climate that could support slavery, which means both of them are going in free, and it's going to upset the balance. So John Calhoun, he's back again, he led this thing called the Nashville Convention to discuss the Southern secession, right? So this is the secession is being talked about again. Now, here is a breakdown of the Compromise of 1850. This was the old Missouri Compromise line, which, as we know, which will be determined unconstitutional in Dred Scott v. Sanford. And this is how it was going to break down. So here you have slaves. Here you have free states and territories. And then these areas here, that was popular sovereignty. This would determine whether or not these folks would be admitted as slave or free. The residents would decide that. Here's another map for you, just to give you another visual, and it depicts the same thing that I just talked about. So the debate over slavery, and I can't take credit for the slide. I borrowed this slide from a fellow teacher. So the debate over slavery, these are the key people involved. So you've got Calhoun. The South must protect slavery, or will peacefully secede. So Webster, Daniel Webster, he's the North. The North will never accept secession. That is a non-starter, dude. And then you have Clay. We got to compromise. Come on. You know, I've done so many in the past. This one's got to work too. And then the Compromise of 1850 was the last debate of these three people, this triumvirate, these three folks who were key in getting all sides to the table. This is the last debate where that happens because Clay is going to pass away soon. He passes away in 1852. So once he's gone, it's tough to get people to come together. So this is another map of the Compromise of 1850, kind of a closer look, just so you can get a more of a bird's eye view of what's happening here. California was admitted as a free state. It ended the slave trade in D.C., but not slavery itself. And popular sovereignty would decide slavery in Utah and New Mexico. A stronger fugitive slave law was created to appease the South, but the Northerners weren't exactly on board for this. So you've got abolitionists who are posting posters all over the North saying, hey, black people, former slaves or current slaves, watch out because slave catchers are coming for you. So the North wasn't really serious about following this fugitive slave law. They were kind of doing their own nullification, as it were. So Taylor threatened to veto the compromise, but his death allowed Millard Fillmore to sign it. So the compromise did go through, but it wasn't successful. Now, the Kansas and Nebraska Act. Let me tell you, folks, this is one hot mess. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was not good times, so let's break it down. So, it was in 1854. It opened two territories, Kansas and Nebraska, to slavery, all right? They declared they would become free or slave based on their constitutions when they applied for statehood. This voided the 3630 line, and it imposed the Wilmot Proviso in reverse. All new territories were now open to slavery, so as opposed to slowing it down, it could potentially speed slavery up. Now, here is what happened with, this is a breakdown of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Compromise of 1850. So you see this purple area is what the can of worms that the Kansas-Nebraska Act opened. All right. Now, because of this act, you have this thing called Bleeding Kansas. So between the act and 1858, elections were held, but there was a lot of fraud and intimidation. See, Kansas, let's go back to the map, borders Missouri. Okay, and there were these people called the Missouri Border Ruffians, okay, and these were pro-slave people. Well, they basically invaded Kansas, okay? Let's go back to the map. They popped right over the border, claimed they were residents, and voted in the elections in an attempt to force Kansas to go slave. So pro-slavery forces did gain control of the Kansas legislature. They passed a pro-slave constitution. This is known as the Lecompton Constitution. It's a very important idea. This was the arguably illegal pro-slave constitution passed by the pro-slavery forces when they engaged in a hostile takeover of the legislature. The Free Soil Party, which was against the expansion of slavery, set up their own government in Topeka, Kansas, and then war erupts between those two groups. In 1856, you have a sack of the Free Soil settlement of Lawrence, and this is the first unofficial battle of the Civil War. This is where the first blood is really spilt, and it's going to be an indicator of future massive problems. So the Kansas, just to give you an overview, Stephen Douglas thought that this would help to organize the Kansas-Nebraska territory. So the Missouri Compromise line is repealed, popular sovereignty is applied. Northerners at this point are like, listen, compromising with the South is impossible. So, effects. You have massive party realignments. We're going to talk about this more in part 4, in the next video, in part 4. The Know Nothing Party was formed. It was anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. The Republican Party formed. They wanted to keep slavery out of territories, and they were a combination of Free Soilers and Whigs. Now you have violence opening up between pro and anti-slavery folks. That's bleeding Kansas. Now, bleeding Sumner. Oh, this is fun. So, we have 2 senators. We have an abolitionist and a pro-slavery senator. Okay, so abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner, he delivers this speech, "The Crime Against Kansas." So he attacks slavery in the South directly. So, Representative Preston Brooks, I'm sorry, he's not a senator, he was a representative, he was enraged. He was positively furious. So later, he attacked Sumner at his desk in the Senate and beat him half to death within an inch of his life. So Sumner was severely injured, and it became a symbol in the North that the South were just a bunch of barbarians, and Preston Brooks was hailed as a Southern hero. So this was a major, major divide. You know, we think our politics are bad now. Honey, we ain't got nothing on 1856 and the Congress then, because they were literally beating each other up on the Senate floor. So as bad as you think it is now, it ain't that bad. All right, that is the end of our show. I hope you learned everything you need to know, and I will see you in the next video.